Welcome to the Independent Women's Forum online panel discussion about the ongoing protests and situation in Iran. My name is Megan Mobbs. I am a senior fellow at IWF and today's host of our policy and current events discussion. Let me please introduce our two distinguished panelists and fellow senior IWF fellows. Ellie Kohanem, who served as U.S. Deputy Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism at the U.S. Department of State during the Trump administration. She was the State Department's first Iranian-born Jewish envoy and led diplomatic initiatives resulting in historic breakthroughs in the Muslim world, including forging groundbreaking partnerships. Ellie arrived as a child refugee to the U.S. after she and her family fled the escalating anti-Semitism in Iran during the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Prior to her appointment to the U.S. State Department, Ellie was Senior Vice President and Special Correspondent for the Jewish Broadcasting Service, where she handled on-air reporting and anchored the broadcast of major international gatherings. Previously, she was an executive at Yeshiva University, the Jewish Theological Seminary, and UGA Federation of New York. Ellie received her BA in Political Science, cum laude, from Barnard College, Columbia University, and conducted a graduate study in international relations at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Welcome, Ellie. And then we also have Azra Nomani, who is the author of two books, Standing Alone, An American Woman's Struggle for the Soul of Islam, and Tantrika, Traveling the Road of Divine Love. A former Wall Street Journal correspondent, she has also written for the Washington Post, New York Times, Slate Magazine, and Time Magazine on Islam, and has covered the war in Afghanistan for Salon.com. She has spoken about women's rights and Islam on CNN, PBS, NPR, and the BBC. A Muslim born in Bombay, India, Azra lived in Piscataway, New Jersey before being raised in the foothills of West Virginia. She is the co-director of the Pearl Project, an investigation into the murder of Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl. Her activism for women's rights at her mosque in West Virginia is the subject of a PBS documentary, The Mosque in Morgantown. A frequent commentator and educational activist, she also helps run the watchdog group Parents Defending Education. Azra, welcome today.
Oh, thank you so much.
Of course. And as you ladies know, today marks the 40th day after the death of Mahsa Amini, who died as a result of police brutality. Her crime, failing to wear the hijab in accordance with government standards. Since her killing, anti-regime protests have occurred in at least 24 cities in Iran across 18 provinces. Even today, crowds gathered at her grave and clashed with members of the police and paramilitary forces. The first protest took place after her death when women ripped off their headscarves in solidarity, and then the protest evolved into one of the most serious challenges to the Islamic Republic since the 1979 revolution. And women have been at the forefront, waving their headscarves in the air, setting them on fire, and cutting their hair in public in protest. Norway-based Iran Human Rights says at least 234 protesters, including 29 children, have been killed by security forces in a crackdown on what Iran's leaders have portrayed as riots fomented by foreigners. So today's discussion is going to cover all of this, 40 days of activity, but also what the administration is currently doing and not doing in response to these protests. So ladies, again, welcome to the discussion. And let's go ahead and jump right into this really compelling conversation about what we can understand about the protests, but also what we can do to demonstrate solidarity with women in Iran. So Ellie, this first question is for you. The current administration is facing a challenge, and this challenge is huge. They're having to manage near immediate national security imperatives, like keeping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, with a slower burn necessity of true political change in Iran. Is the Biden administration meeting this moment and successfully balancing those short-term and long-term policies for the U.S.?
Megan, first, I just want to thank IWF for hosting this event. It is so important, and the mere fact that IWF is hosting this, that people are listening to us, is a sign of support for Iranians who are risking their lives every day out there demanding their freedoms. I just want to thank you and thank IWF again for hosting this conversation, and Asra also for it's an honor to share the stage with you, Asra. Regarding the Biden administration's America's long-term national security interests and the moment that we find ourselves in right now, what I would tell you is that the Biden administration has been telling the American people since they came into office that their pretty much only priority and number one priority in dealing with the Islamic Republic of Iran is putting their nuclear weapons program or their nuclear program in a box. This is the language that they use. And they believe that returning to the 2015 JCPOA Iran deal is the method, is the vehicle for doing that. Now, the reality is that we're 18 months into the Vienna talks, the talks that are taking place to re-enter this 2015 Iran deal, which I just want to remind the audience that President Trump walked out of this deal, calling it a disaster, and also in response to the Islamic regime's non-compliance. So after 18 months, the Biden administration has really nothing to show for themselves. And yet they tell us over and over again that that the only route for them to deal with the Islamic Republic is diplomacy. Now, what we have right now is a split screen moment, which is the Biden administration still not saying that they're going to walk away from these negotiations. And at the same time, thousands upon thousands of Iranians in 6 weeks now of protests going out there every day, and they're chanting words that are very easy to understand: azadi, freedom, death to the dictator. They're letting us know what they want, which is regime change. This government has no legitimacy at home, if you could ever even call it a government. So the reality is that if the Biden administration really does want to handle at the same time their America's long-term national security interest, which is to not really contain Iran's nuclear program, but really to end it, then there's one path that they have left to them, having tried diplomacy and failing with that for 18 months. And that is to put the military option, taking a very strong military posture towards the Iranians right now, and making a very clear red line to this regime. If they cross the red line, the U.S. will take action. I believe that under President Trump, the Islamic Republic of Iran understood that. And it behooves Joe Biden to make that clear as well.
Ellie, you mentioned that the words are easy to understand because they speak so much to us. And Azra, you're wearing a shirt that has some of those words on them. So can you share a little bit more about what you're wearing and why you're wearing it?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having this. And I completely agree with what Ellie is saying. You know, as a Muslim woman, I found sisterhood among the amazing, brave women that are in the Independent Women's Forum. And I found kinship. And that is not easy to say, even in the West. And so the shirt that I wear is one that is finally taken off in the West. And I'm going to pull my hair back because what I say is, I am woman. And that's a really important point right now in a battle that we're facing in the United States about being a woman. I am woman, I'm life, I'm freedom. These are such important principles that are so fundamental, right, to our existence. Right now, I'm sitting in my living room. The wind is coming through the open window. I have my car parked outside. I can run to get more cat food from my cat Ninja behind the wheel of my car. I'm a single mom. These are all phenomena that I, as a Muslim woman in many of my Muslim countries, could not enjoy. These are freedoms that I could not enjoy. And in the country of Iran, unfortunately, since 1979, women have been second-class citizens. So these simple ideas have been erased. And so while we, cherish these kind of rights in the United States, what I have behind me is my bookcase. And in the bookcase, I've organized it chronologically from the birth of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism to the reality of our modern day over here, which is our battle in 1979 with radicalism in Iran, and then radicalism in Saudi Arabia. This has been my lifetime, as it has been Ellie's. And the problem that we have faced is that there has been this unholy alliance that Ellie talks about a little bit, that has given a pass to regimes like Iran's. So when Ellie talks about, this top priority that the Biden administration has to have a nuclear peace deal with Iran, we have to recognize that that comes with the compromise of these principles, these fundamental principles. And that is what this murder, I would say, of Mahsa Amini just crystallized, for the world. This truth that we have been speaking for decades now, that a nation and a government, just like Ellie was saying, is no governance when it terrorizes its people. Mahsa's death was that of a simple young woman emerging from a subway in Tehran to be blocked in her path by the so-called morality police. And what I have beside me here are these books, just a row of books. And these are all books about women throughout our Muslim societies that have been killed in the name of honor, murder in the name of honor. That is such a fundamental principle that we cannot compromise, for something like this nuclear deal. But unfortunately, what we face in Washington, D.C., and in the United States and in the West is this dangerous, dangerous lobby of sympathizers, perhaps on the payroll, somehow paid to parrot and cover for this regime that is in Iran. And that is our greatest fundamental challenge right now. I know for me, when I look at these Iranians that are not only on the streets, but in the court of public opinion, so unapologetic for these fundamental principles, Megan, I just say that more power to them. Like, that is the moment that we have come where we reject this history of tyranny and say that these fundamental freedoms have to be the ones that we believe a nation must express for its people. And so I know for myself, these last weeks have just been very, very moving. My lifetime has been one in which our lives have been defined by the interpretation of Islam that unfortunately defines the nation of Iran right now. It has been exported to the world through the Iranian regime and then through the Sunni version in Saudi Arabia, causing great battle, in the lives of women and girls everywhere, and also men and boys. And so this war that we're in right now is one that I know is fundamental for us to win, most importantly for the people of Iran, but also for our entire world. We have a community of Muslims like myself who have been battling for an interpretation of Islam that is an Islam of grace and women's rights and life and freedom and joy. And so the stakes are really high, you all. It's very, very high. And I'm just so happy that we're having this conversation so that we can really bring more support to the people of Iran.
No, absolutely. And before we even joined the conversation, the three of us were just kind of getting ready and talking. And we kind of had the comment about, well, this may not be in some people's awareness in America, maybe outside their radar. They may not realize what's going on. And Ellie, you made the comment that you couldn't understand how that could be possible because you've been so immersed in all of this and so ready to provide commentary and engagement around it. But how could we do better? What could we do better to make sure that we are imparting just what Azra said, the importance of this movement for women in Iran, but all Muslim women and women everywhere who experience true oppression, the true inability to be free? How do we better reach those women here in America who maybe aren't understanding or don't understanding the extent of what's currently happening?
Well, I first of all want to echo Asra's sentiment about the importance of the events that are taking place right now in Iran. If the Iranian people succeed, and I am convinced that they will achieve their freedom. The way that I know that is because I'm seeing an awe-inspiring bravery by women and girls as young as 15 who every time they go out to protest understand that they may not come home, and sadly too many are not coming home. People are also being murdered by regime forces who just happen to be at locations where protests are taking place. And we've seen a lot of video footage on social media, really heartbreaking footage of people who are in the midst of videotaping and documenting others who are being attacked. And at that same moment, a bullet goes through a woman, a driver, a mother. We saw this footage on social media just earlier today where she was driving and recording, and then it's clear the phone drops and that she herself gets killed. So what we're seeing now is this incredibly brave, courageous, awe-inspiring women's movement. And I am convinced that the people of Iran are going to achieve their freedom. I think the question just becomes, and Megan, this is in response to what you're saying, how much human sacrifice do we need to see before the Iranian people achieve their freedom? How many more people, how many more women, men, and children need to die in Iran before they achieve this freedom, which they are going to, because that is the will of the people? And so, Megan, in terms of what we all outside of the country can do to support them, I think it behooves us to contact all of our elected officials. And we need to let our elected officials know the following. Number one, Americans do not support ongoing negotiations with this illegitimate regime in Vienna, the Iran deal talks. Joe Biden needs to call these talks off. He needs to make Iran, the Islamic Republic, into a pariah state. Number two, we need to increase sanctions on the Islamic Republic. And so that's another thing that we can ask our elected officials to do for us. And number three, it's well over time for the United Nations to hold an emergency session. The United Nations Human Rights Council needs to hold an emergency session to deal with these ongoing atrocities that are being committed against the Iranian people today. So those are all things that we can ask our elected officials to do. And then finally, I also do recommend that everybody use their voice and social media platform, no matter how big or small your platform is, get your voice heard and let the world know that you stand with the people of Iran today.
Yeah, I want to just say that every individual person matters now in this court of public opinion that we are in when it comes to public diplomacy. I'll give one example. The special envoy in the State Department is a man. What's his name, Ellie?
Rob Malley.
Rob Malley. And you know better than I do. Rob Malley, would you say that he has been on the side of the Iranian people and women for freedom, the fundamental freedoms that we've been talking about?
Well, Asra, I think you're about to share with everyone that there's been a huge outcry because Iranians believe he has not been.
Yeah, and that's what's so remarkable. All you have to do is please do start a Twitter account if you don't have one. You don't have to use your real name. You can have one follower. It doesn't matter. Sometimes you have to believe that somebody with 10 followers can be so powerful because they are just the ordinary voice speaking truth to power. And the important idea is you do something that is called tagging. So you find out the handle of Rob Malley, and I found it out, and you just start messaging. And you don't have to come up with the messages. Look up the hashtag Iran Revolution, Mahsa Amini. You will find the voices of the Iranian people and you will see the authenticity, because the authenticity comes right now in people who are unapologetic. They are not playing, footsie anymore on this, trying to play nice with the Biden administration when it comes to these compromises. What Ellie was saying, Rob Malley has compromised the desires of this movement, freedom movement. And let me just give you one example. As a journalist, I've studied how words, can be framed. And there were marches this weekend. And there's a simple message that the Iranian people are seeking right now, and that is regime change. Sounds radical, right? But want you to just get your head around that idea, is they want this regime out. And if we think of those dictators that have existed in society, it is not an unrealistic ask to want that kind of peace in life in their country. So Rob Malley, though, he ended up tweeting out, quote, support for the Iranian people for these protests. And what did he say, Ellie, that they were protesting for?
That their government would recognize, I can pull up the exact tweet, but it was
respect.
that the government would respect and
Yes.
recognize, and so Asra, to your point, no one's asking for the Islamic Republic regime to recognize anything. They want this regime out. Over 40 years of oppression. They want regime change. Exactly what you're saying, Asra. They want regime change. And that's why there was an outcry against Rob Malley. And just so everybody knows his title, he's the United States Special Envoy for Iran Affairs. And so he's the Biden administration's point person on Iran.
And don't feel overwhelmed or intimidated if you didn't know who he was 10 minutes ago, because what happens is you will become fast learners in the players. And trust me when I say that when it comes to the lobbyists who are supporting the regime right now, there's about a dozen names. Reza Aslan, he has been my nemesis for years, trying to shut me up as a woman fighting for women's rights. These are people that we have been battling in the trenches. And there's a reason why the book that I wrote about Islam was called Standing Alone, because for so many years, unfortunately, the liberal progressives in America have been hijacked by these Islamists that tell them that they can't speak up, otherwise they'll be Islamophobic. But we had a big success a few weeks ago. One of the freedom fighters, Mahsa Amini, was on Bill Maher, and she spoke truth to power in her beautiful mane of hair. And that is what is so inspiring to me. And I want to just give one example, breaking news. Ordinary Iranians shared photos from the trenches in the battle. And these were photos of what they call a paintball marker. They're not called guns because they mark the target. So they asked, what is this company doing? Providing paintball, quote, markers to the government of Iran. Well, as a journalist, then I found the company. They said they didn't sell to the government of Iran because we have regulations that it's on a list of countries to which you cannot sell weapons. But guess what? The guy, Bill Saransky, the CEO of this company, Core Outdoor, just wrote back to me a few minutes ago, and he said, this is because just regular people, Iranians and non-Iranians, started tagging him and his company and asking, what's going on? I wanted to thank you for our conversation, very polite. He looked at the images, specifically the ones with, yes, somebody had put a poo emoji on one of the pictures, and he did an internal audit on the sales of the product to customers outside the US. As such, we found 2 European distributors that had purchased the item in question in bulk. Both of the customers buy and redistribute the product in question to their countries. And purchases are not larger or out of the ordinary in any way, but they can end up in Iran. So what he has done, he has asked them for a full audit of all the sales of this, quote, marker that is ending up in the hands of the security forces in Iran. And he's asking for the purchase information. I mean, it's like a boring list, right? Shipping documents, serial numbers, current on-hand inventory. This is what we, the ordinary people, as Nancy Drews, can do to help the people of Iran. You know, we can pick up the phone, right? When they can't, we can ask the questions. And this, right, Ellie, don't you think? These are just ordinary kind of things. Maybe we can hold accountable these paintball markers going and threatening when bullets don't come out, but these markers in order to intimidate the people. And they hurt. I played paintball once. They hurt also. It's not a joke. But we got some accountability, and we're going to stay on it. And that's what we can do. Don't you think?
Absolutely. I think, Asra, that's a really great case study. And yeah, I really do want to explain that the Iranian authorities, the security apparatus, has been using these paintball guns against protesters. So, and they do injure people. So this is not a small thing that we figured, that you all and this team of active citizens figured this out. And I do think it's a great again case study of what people can do just by caring.
And Azra, you talk about the Mama Bear movement, and the New Yorker called this the spark and an engine for an attempted counter-revolution in Iran, that it's women stepping up and doing this. And so why are women so important in this moment for Iran and the world? And can you speak a little bit about your advocacy for Islamic feminism?
Yeah, I put added to the slogan this idea that I am woman, because in the United States, in this culture war that we're in, there is a battle right now in which women are being erased. And this is a phenomena. This is what connects, my own efforts against Islamism and wokeism, because women are being erased on both sides of this extreme. And I'll give you an example. I have this lovely book here. To You, O Jewel of the Society. Sounds wonderful, right? This is propaganda that comes out to tell us as Muslim women what it means to be a believing, righteous Muslim woman. And on the post-it note pages, I note here that it says that our friends are every believing Muslim woman, so that wouldn't be you, Ellie, who adheres to Allah's religion. I couldn't be friends with you two, because her dislike and hatred is for the Jews. This is why Ellie left Iran. Just think about this. This impacted a family. Her dislike and hatred is for the Jews, Christians, hypocrites, secularists. What is a secularist in this definition? Somebody who does not believe in an Islamic state. So if we as a society have decided that we are going to go and oppose any kind of supremacist, the Iranian regime is Muslim supremacist, because they do not believe in a freedom in which anybody of any faith or non-faith can rise to power. And then finally, the proponents of women's liberation. And I want to just connect the dots to this section. It's about hijab. And hijab is the word that has been inaccurately translated as a headscarf. But in fact, in 9 references in the Quran, not once is the hijab ever used to say that we as women have to cover our hair. So what is this? I call it the great cover-up. It is men who have interpreted the Quran in order to erase us, to cover us up. And what is the principle that they use? Honor and shame. So in this instance, for example, they say exactly that the prescription, the hijab should be thick, not thin, and it should not reveal what is under it. So what is under it but us, the woman? What is Islamic feminism? Islamic feminism is the reinterpretation of these verses in the Quran that have denied us equal rights, equal witness, equal inheritance, equal rights in movement in society. These are fundamental human rights. And so we cannot accept this interpretation. But for decades, we in the West have had this unholy alliance with these Islamist regimes, from Saudi Arabia to Iran, now to Qatar also, and elements in Turkey, plus in Pakistan. Just remain consistent with your values. That's all I ask of everyone. If you believe that a woman is not too sexy for her hair, then you stand with women of Iran. If you believe that a woman has equal witness to a man in issues of crime or court, then you stand with the women of Iran. There should be no confusion about it. There should be clarity. And what I'm finding is that the Iranian people are giving you permission, should you fear at all of coming out because it's not your culture, or it's not your religion. They are saying strong and unapologetically that this interpretation of Islam that has ruled the country of Iran for over 40 years is inhumane, and it is a terrorist regime. And so this is what we have been fighting for. And I cannot even begin to tell you how it just stirs me to the soul to see the Iranian people fight with such clarity. They have no shame in it. And that's what's so wonderful. They cannot be shamed. And that is what is so beautiful, because for too long, many of us Muslim reformers have been very alone in this battle, especially in the United States. In Bangladesh, they get assassinated. Pakistan, they lose their lives. And this fire that has started in Iran can impact the lives of women and girls and men and boys throughout our entire globe when it wins. And I say when it wins because it will win, because this quest for freedom is inevitable. And the regime in Iran is going to learn that soon enough.
I truly believe that. Oh, go ahead, Ellie, please.
Well, I would love to also just give some context to what Asra was sharing just now. So for those who may not know or are not old enough to know, this regime has only been in power since 1979. I was born in Iran myself to a Jewish family, and the era that I was born, the king was Reza Shah Pahlavi, and he had instituted many reforms in the country, giving minorities rights, giving women rights. And so when I was born in Iran in 1972, my mother, as a Jewish woman, had freedoms. She was the highest educated of anyone in her family. She had gone to a French school and she had studied 3 languages. And my mother, if you see pictures of my mom in Iran in the 70s, she's wearing mini skirts. She's fashionable, and her photo could have been really in any major city in any part of the world of that time. And so women in Iran under the Shah, prior to the 1979 Islamic Revolution, attained the highest levels of education. They attained the highest levels of career, and they were represented in government. What happened was in 1978-79, there was a revolution, and the Islamists under the Ayatollah Khomeini grabbed power. And the people who were revolting at that time against the Shah's rule was a coalition from the far left communists to the very religious Muslims. And the majority of them had no intention or idea that this kind of oppressive dictatorship would then take over the country. But that is what unfolded. And in the very first days, one of the first things that the regime did was they murdered the president of the Jewish community, Mr. Habib al-Ghanayan, whom we will never forget. They executed him after a sham show trial, accusing him of being a Zionist spy. And at that time, there were 100,000 Jews living in Iran, including my family. And we got the message. We understood that the regime was making an example of Mr. al-Ghanayan. And so we understood we were not safe. And so my family, we were fortunate to flee the country very quickly. And so I was blessed to become a refugee to the United States of America. But what I want our audience to understand is that the gender apartheid that women in Iran are facing today, and it is gender apartheid, they are third-class citizens, not even second-class citizens in Iran legally. Their very bodies are policed by this so-called morality police, right? They have no agency in Iran. And so this very gender apartheid that the Iranian women are facing today is not some sort of natural cultural norm in Iran. Not that long ago, meaning in my own lifetime, Iranian women had freedoms. They looked like they could be living in the West. They were living like they were living in the West. And this regime is what's unusual, is what's not normal, is what's outside of the norm. And that's why regime change is very much in the realm of possibility, because in the thousands of year-old history of the Persian people, which later becomes Iran, in that thousands of years of history of great civilization, of leaders like Cyrus the Great, in that context, this regime is just a blip, and they will join the ash heap of history of the oppressive dictatorships like the Soviet Union, like the Nazis in Europe. They will join that ash heap.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. If I could just, it's so tragic, and I'm, Iran's loss has been America's gain with your arrival here. What is your mom's name? I just want to honor her.
Sure, thank you. Her name is Shahnaz, which actually has the word Shah.
Shahnaz, and it means, Shah means king, so Shahnaz is the feminine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my mom's name is Sajida, and Sajida means it's a version of the word sajda, to prostrate. But my mom, like your mom, did not prostrate ever to this interpretation of Islam. And that's why I sit here, as you do there, fierce and strong, because that power flows through us, just like I know it flows through the veins of the women watching and the men also, that we have pioneers in our ancestry, and your mom was one. My mom was one. My mom got her studies in a Catholic convent in India, and she was forced to get married because she dared, when she went to college, to take off the face veil that her family required her to wear. And when she got married, she happened to marry into a family of my grandmother was a feminist who had taken the scarf off herself in the 1950s. The first woman, to your point, Ellie, in the 50s, she was standing up to that kind of interpretation. And if folks don't know this, the dots connect to extremism. Because that same interpretation that forced Ellie's family to flee Iran is the interpretation decades later that was used to justify the killing and murder of this great colleague of mine from the Wall Street Journal, Danny Pearl, in the name of Islam, because he was Jewish. So the stakes are really high. I hope you all can see in us, the stories of families that have fought for the same kind of freedoms and liberty that you believe, and that the struggle is on right now. It's so fierce, and that's why it's just so important in whichever way we can to support the people of Iran, because their victory is our victory.
And both of you women are speaking about the Iranians people, a kind of audacity of optimism, the belief that what they're doing matters. And it's not just women. You mentioned the children that are out there, young girls, young boys, men that are standing shoulder to shoulder against this oppressive authoritarian government. And you also both spoke about right now some of the diplomatic missteps of our own country, of Robert Malley, but also even recently, Secretary Blinken met with civil society activists to talk about women's rights and human rights in Iran, and he vowed support because they are demanding these fundamental freedoms. But does that word from us carry any weight anymore? Does that word of support? And Ellie, you talked about a red line. Where is that red line for our government? And would they believe it even if we established one? And if they did believe it, what should we do if it's crossed?
Well, Megan, the red line has already been crossed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. I mean, over and over and over again. So, if you're talking about the red line in handling protests on the streets, well, they're using live ammunition. They're murdering protesters. It breaks my heart to talk about it, but they are raping women in the prisons.
Mm.
We've seen reports of that. We've seen reports of girls when their mothers are going to visit them in jail. They're asking their mothers to bring birth control to them for that reason. So the most heinous atrocities are being committed against the Iranian people for the simple fact that they're fighting for their freedom. So every red line that you can imagine. Now, if you're talking about the red lines of the Islamic Republic against the United States, well, they have over and over again attacked our assets in the region. There is blood on the hands of the Islamic Republic's IRGC, American service members, women and men. So every red line that you can imagine has been crossed. And so, Megan, if the question is what could Joe Biden do now? What can this administration do right now? There's many steps that they can take. And so, I'm going to just mention them again, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit repetitive. The first thing that Biden needs to do, he came into office and he said that he was going to make the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia a pariah state. Now, the Saudis and Asra, I know that there is, valid criticism, but the Saudis have been 70 years plus allies, strategic allies of the United States. Joe Biden, at the same time, has yet to make the Islamic Republic of Iran a pariah state, which has been the enemy of the United States, which daily calls for death to America. So the first thing that Biden would really need to do is to make the effort to isolate the Islamic Republic of Iran. And really the first thing that requires is the notion that we are not negotiating with these people. Negotiations are over. We're not talking with them. We can't say we wouldn't sit across the table with them, because believe it or not, in the Vienna talks, it's the Islamic Republic that told America that they won't sit at the table with us. The Vienna talks have had the Russians and the Chinese, if you can imagine such a thing. They've been negotiating on behalf of the United States. Putting all of that insanity aside, it's time for Joe Biden to say, we're not negotiating with this regime. This is not a legitimate regime. Vienna talks are over. Talks are over. The second step that Biden should be taking is he should be rallying the international community against the regime. The U.S. does not have diplomatic relations with the Islamic Republic, but Europe does. The Europeans need to recall their ambassadors from Iran, and the next thing they need to do is they need to expel the so-called diplomats of the Islamic Republic from their soil. And I just want to remind everybody, I was on Fox News this weekend about this topic. The White House confirmed this week that the Islamic Republic has not only supplied Russia with drones, but they also have men on the ground right now in Crimea, teaching, right, training, and maintaining the drones. They're teaching the Russian troops how to use Iranian technology. So they've now become, combatants in this war. And for anyone who thought that the Islamic Republic is a Middle Eastern problem, it's Israel's problem, it's Saudi's problem, it's Emirates' problem, it's not our problem here in Europe. Well, guess what? They brought it to your doorstep, Europe. So it's time for the Europeans to expel Islamic Republic's so-called diplomats from their soil. The UN, there's so much that could be done in the UN. The Iranian Crown Prince has recently asked Antonio Guterres to hold an emergency session of the UNHCR. That must be done. Let's understand the atrocities that are being committed against the Iranian people right now. So those are all steps that governments can take to really isolate the Islamic Republic and help usher them out of power. The Iranian people have said over and over again, we're not asking you America, you Europe, to do anything, just get out of our way. But the reality is that there is much that these governments can do, again, to usher the regime out of power in the most peaceful way possible, because their days are numbered.
And Ellie, you're talking about this kind of emerging alliance between Moscow and Tehran, and there is no deep love between Russia and Iran. I mean, historically speaking, there isn't kind of that deep relationship. They're kind of wary partners in all of this. But where they do share a view is of the West, of the United States, as truly a great enemy and a threat to both of those regimes' hold on power. And you just mentioned the kind of the kamikaze drones that we've seen, the boots on the ground in Crimea with the Iranians. So Azra, I'm curious about your thoughts on what are the implications of this kind of rapidly emerging, more solidified alliance than we've seen in the past?
Well, thank you first, Ellie, for crystallizing so well the demands really of the uh, freedom fighters of Iran. There is agreement on these demands. In case anybody wonders, uh, these are repeated again and again. And I think what we will do is on IWF and IWN's website, we'll put a blog article for you all listing these terms for you to be able to communicate to your lawmakers, and please communicate them on both sides of the aisle. Because yes, indeed, it's a dangerous alliance that is happening over there. I will speak for a moment about the red line that I see in the intellectual and ethical, battle that we're also in. We as a nation, and as a people, came to recognize that this invasion that the Russians did and Putin did on Ukraine was unacceptable, right? I walked through Alexandria, Virginia, and I saw as many flags of Ukraine on the doorsteps of townhomes as I did US flags. It's beautiful when we stand clearly, without any confusion, but with clarity against terrorist regimes. So what I would like to just do is invite everybody to keep that ethical and intellectual congruence on your values and the public debate, so that it is a red line for you if somebody tries to justify any kind of the quote policy initiatives that the Iranian regime has taken in governing over its people. Like, oh, it's their culture, so they have to cover their hair. It's not our culture. It's not our religion. Oh, we can't interfere in things that are happening over there. Yeah, we can, because we can speak up. We can stand up for what is right. I'll give one example of transgression. If you can believe it, and this is what we're facing as a battle in the United States, a woman stood up in the Boston City Council just days ago, and she introduced a resolution in which Mahsa Amini's birthday would be recognized then as Boston Hijab Day. I read to you all from this book about the way this idea of hijab is interpreted by the government of Iran. It's all about control and shrouding women as vessels of honor. That's rape culture. Like, we know that the liberal progressives have defined that as rape culture when you say that a woman is responsible for, quote, chastity in society. But guess what? There was no one on that city council who had the intellect and ethical congruence to say, wait a second, she was killed because of the demand of the hijab. What are we doing celebrating the hijab? But this is the topsy-turvy world that many of the lobbyists and propagandists for these regimes try to do to us. They try to turn us upside down and guilt us and shame us into accepting their value system. So I want to invite all of you, give you permission to have a red line when it comes to your sense of human rights, women's rights, and dignity out there in the world. Nobody can tell a woman that she's illegal if her hair is showing. Nobody has a right to tell a woman that she cannot travel because she doesn't have her husband's permission. Stay clear on that. Don't allow any of the cultural relativism of those that are the propagandists. And how has that already happened? For years, activists from this organization called Code Pink have done spring break trips to Iran, wearing hijabs in pink now to message their propaganda of peace with this government of Iran. So the red line that Ellie identified for you all so clearly, from a military and national security perspective, they themselves crossed, because they crossed our own inner, congruence. They became hypocrites. And that is ultimately what's so ironic about the battle that we're facing in the West to get the Biden administration to have the correct policy. They say that they're champions for women. They say that they're champions for human rights, but they cannot make compromises then. President Obama just had a podcast in which he admitted that he made a mistake in 2009. So we know what the deadly cost of that mistake has been. It has been the life of this young woman named Mahsa Amini. If we had put pressure on the government of Iran back then and not allowed them to have this kind of tyranny and terrorism over the women and girls of its nation, then perhaps Mahsa Amini would be alive today. It's not enough for them to just look back and say, oh, I made a mistake, and then continue to make that mistake. So please, when we give you the suggested, messages that the Iranian people are seeking from our government, call lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, because we need to persuade everyone to stand on the correct side of history on this one.
Azra, you're absolutely right in terms of also, I think oftentimes women, even in America, feel a little bit shamed into silence to talk on some of these things for a whole host of reasons. Maybe it feels like we don't understand the context, Ellie, which you laid out so lovingly and clearly, the historical context of what's happening. But so many of us don't know that. And so they don't feel comfortable stepping into the arena of public discourse or public diplomacy because they feel they don't have the right words or the right phrases, or for fear of overstepping or misstepping. And so to your point, Azra, about having the courage to do that and having that moral and ethical congruence inside of yourself and making sure that no matter what it is, standing up and saying those things. And truly, IWF and IWN are places and forums where women can go to hear that, where they can hear that perspective, they can better understand and get the context of what's happening so they can feel comfortable to be leaders and advocates in their own communities, wherever they may be. And so we are running short on time, but Ellie, before we sign off, you have been such a voice in all of this. Your Twitter feed is so powerful and dominant. You've been all across media talking about this. I would really like you to kind of give a quick synopsis on all of this and truly what are the takeaway messages for everyone who's been listening.
Well, what I have to tell you, Megan, I haven't been able to sleep at night since this revolution started. And again, I really want to reiterate that it started out as a protest movement. It has become a revolution. People, thousands, if not millions of Iranians are out on the streets every day, and they're chanting for regime change. They are demanding their freedom. There are strikes taking place all across the country. More and more sectors are joining the strikes every day. So again, I am convinced that this time is different. I'm convinced that the Iranian people seem to be willing to risk their lives, to take a bullet in order to achieve freedom for the nation as a whole. And we're also seeing incredible ethnic unity among the Iranian people. Iran is a very ethnically diverse country with Persians, Kurds, Balochis, even people of Turkish descent. And we're seeing incredible unity, ethnic, religious unity. Everybody is in the same boat. Everybody has been living under horrible oppression, horrible daily abuses of their basic human rights and fundamental freedoms, and the country as a whole has had enough. So I'm convinced that the Iranian people will achieve their freedom, and I just really encourage everyone to please use your voice and use your ability, your freedom, your rights as a citizen of the United States of America, everything that we're so fortunate to have, and let your elected officials know what your will is and how you would like to see the United States relate to the people of Iran right now.
Thank you so much, Ellie. And Azra, you have your handle in your bio. Ellie, do you want to go ahead and give your Twitter handle so folks can follow along?
Sure. It's just my name. It's at Ellie Kohanim, just the way everyone sees it on the screen. ELLIE. Kohanim is COHANIM. And thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Ladies, thank you both for joining the conversation, for your powerful engagement, your powerful advocacy, and all that you do all the time to ensure that we do Azra, to your point, maintain that sense of moral consistency, that kind of upholding our beliefs and our value systems, and truly embodying the slogan that you have on your shirt, that we are women, we are life, and we are freedom. So ladies, thank you again for joining us. It was a pleasure speaking to you both.
Thank you so much, everyone. Live with moral courage, and let's win this.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, IWF, IWN.